Well, with that, I think it's time for us to move on to the main topic, where we had a recent report about Dinwiddie converting his contract. For those of you who don't know, he's an NBA player for the Nets with a 3-year, $34 million contract that he has announced will become a digital investment opportunity. I know you're usually the security token guy, Kyle, so maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this offering.
Yeah, I'm excited to I was really excited to see this piece of news. It's been reported in a lot of large-scale journals and financial journals. And so Spencer Dinwiddie is a NBA player, and he's got a 3-year, $30 million contract. And in the NBA, that's fully guaranteed. So he is entitled to that money whether he gets injured or whether he plays poorly, whatever. It's fully guaranteed for him with the Brooklyn Nets. And so what his idea and what he is working on right now is to essentially raise money now with the promise of getting paid back this $34 million contract. So it really kind of becomes a fixed income deal where you've got a $34 million maturity that pays out specific coupons. I believe it's like 10.6 million this year, maybe 11.5 the following year, and then there's the third year that is actually a player option. So he can choose whether he'd like to exercise that and be paid that contract or renegotiate and start a new contract. So this is a callable bond, a 2-year callable, or a 3-year bond with a callable option on the third year, or the second year rather. And so it's essentially a straight fixed income opportunity with coupon payments, and really what he's going to do, I'm sure, is gauge interest, gauge who's interested in participating, and see how much money he can get up front in exchange for what interest rate he would need to pay at the conclusion of the contract. So your interest rate or your max interest rate could be $34 million, and then we'll see how much he can raise in a lump sum up front. And so it's a really interesting idea. It's certainly it is something that could be very easily created and valued, and we'll have to see what the interest has been in these kinds of deals before. This is not the first time that people have thought about conducting something along these lines. Certainly the first time that we're leveraging a security token, which I think provides a little bit more legitimacy for this offering because there's actually a liquid market to be able to resell or exchange the deal. But Herwig, this isn't the first time, right?
No, it's not in the past, and there have been other crowdfunding platforms that have tried to do something similar. Their most notable one is a company called Fantex, which launched around 2012, 2013, and ultimately had a bit of a different model, Kyle. Instead of investing in a specific contract, which I think is much easier to do than on a deal-by-deal basis, here with Fantex, what you would do is you would invest in the athlete's entire future earnings. So they would typically invest, I think some of the examples they gave were for $10 or $20 million, buy 10 to 20% of the future income of that player. That includes not only their player contracts, but also the endorsements, which we know can also be a very lucrative component for athletes, especially post-season.
It's often more lucrative than the contract itself.
Exactly, and post-retirement. So this is a different model. It is fascinating. The company went public and ultimately has fizzled out. So unfortunately, there's not much more we can learn there as to what happened, though I do expect that blockchain technology and tokenized securities here will dramatically improve this process, dramatically improve the experience, as well as create more of a liquidity component that's probably what was missing for a lot of these things. But more importantly, there were also a lot of lost players that they were not able to salvage, and something happened there that forced the company to fold. So I think that also highlights a little bit, Kyle, the importance of being able to attract high quality products to your marketplace. In this case, they were touting themselves as the stock market for sports athletes, and they had signed up golfers and basketball players and football players, but ultimately have shut down. So there's definitely a lot to learn from that for anyone who is in that space. But that's why I think this deal is even more interesting, because now you're talking about a specific contract. You certainly would want to know what happens if Dinwiddie decides to go ahead and exercise the right to renegotiate. So did you just lose out on a portion of that remaining 11 million that's supposed to be paid out? Or are you going to get a portion of the new 11 million? Is he in a position then to actually be conflicted to say, well, if I take less money in this first year, but I get more money in the new deal later on, you might get screwed out for the investors a little bit. So just absolutely fascinating, I think, that people are going to do this. And I guess in layman terms, he's, I guess, looking for something like however much he would raise, but for the sake of an example, $25 million today in order to pay out $34 million over the next 3 years. And he could go and reuse that money by investing it or structuring it, or he wants to take advantage of having the cash all at once or investing in something big. Who knows? But I think it's something that other players will look to, have done successfully. And I think this could open up a whole new industry, because for sure this is another one of those niche financing opportunities that people have talked about. People have tried to do it clearly. There's some activity going on, but it's certainly not something that is commonplace or even expected in the space. So this is seen as novel and new and a great way to potentially leverage security tokens as well. So it's both a win for our industry as well as a win for what seems to be this new sports financing industry, which doesn't have to be limited to just players, but it could be teams. We've seen potential clubs in Europe and other teams look at tokenizing. We know the Packers, I believe. Publicly owned, right? So there is this concept of it, but it's certainly a new industry. So I think this is really a great mark for both.
Definitely. We've seen this wave of athletes starting to look at new financing with Russell Okung from the Chargers. I guess they're the LA Chargers now, being a strong proponent of advocating for crypto and for moving away from traditional financing methods for athletes. And now Spencer Dinwiddie is considering one of these options. It's fantastic. And I like the fact that they're using an NBA contract as a pilot. It's fully guaranteed, which I think is going to be important. I think that the headline athlete of the former company was Arian Foster, who was a great running back in the NFL, but his contract wasn't guaranteed. And so I think when I read about it, the whole deal kind of fell through after he suffered a pretty serious Achilles injury that ended up getting him cut from the team, and he wasn't entitled to a lot of the money that he was originally promised. I have no insider information on that actual deal, but I can imagine that certainly played a part in why that fell through. So with an NBA contract, it's fully guaranteed. You can value this like any traditional callable bond. You should be able to calculate what interest rate investors want, justify the price of the debt instrument, and be able to do it in a pretty straightforward manner, I'd imagine. So this is a super effective thing for athletes if you want to get your cash up front. It's just like when you win the lottery, you can either get it in installments or you can get your lump sum, and some people choose one way and some people choose the other. So very interesting. We'll have to monitor. We'll certainly give you the terms whenever they come out. If we can find information on what the terms of this deal are and give you updates on what happens moving forward if this thing actually is able to successfully raise the money.
It's really interesting, like you said earlier, that not necessarily outside of the NBA, there isn't necessarily a fully guaranteed contract. So this could be a new way for both markets as well as players to start hedging themselves outside of those issues, right?
Yeah.
This could be that kind of a risk-reducing way to raise capital or sell yourself, if you will, through a digital contract. So I'm excited to see what other use cases are going to come out. We're going to see individual contracts. We might see platforms or marketplaces try to come about for the full rights of an individual, as we saw with Fantex, and there might be some stuff in between. But the reality is this is now becoming something that is a new investable asset class, leading the way here with this digital investment, and I'm excited to keep covering it and continuing to see other examples like this pop up left and right, because previously they were not investable, they were not doable. Now, thanks to security tokens, it's a possibility.
It's a possibility, and I don't want to go too far and spend another 30 minutes talking about this, but the reality is that you can couple this opportunity and say, hey, look, I want to invest in all of the Brooklyn Nets salaries, right? So the Brooklyn Nets team could say, here's all of our contracts we have to pay out. You can invest in that and get exposure, or from the other side, the teams the players rather, can bond together, and you can invest in a bunch of these contracts, distribute your risk over all of the individual players, and it's very, very interesting. We'll have to watch.
Next thing you know, Kyle, you got fund managers putting together different portfollios of different
athletes,
sports contracts,
endorsement
and
deals.
athletes. Some, you got an NBA batch, you've got a cross platform batch where you get exposed to multiple different types. It's exciting. It's
very
super cool. We're going to see a lot more of it for sure. We'll of course keep you updated. That's all we have on the topic for you today. I want to thank all of you once again for always tuning in and listening and taking the time to listen to what we have to say. As always, we ask you to join our community, participate, contribute, and last but not least, of course, please check out that letter to the SEC and voice your support for us. You'll be making history alongside us, and see you next week.
See you later.